I'm Paul Healy from Sony Electronics. Today we have a very special guest for you, Jon Kasbe, a Emmy Award-winning documentarian that recently just had his project at Tribeca and walked away with an award from that show and moved on to other festivals. We're very excited to show you some of his content as well. We are, obviously, Sony Manufacturing. We are definitely going to be particular to our camera in this conversation, but I truly hope that the language you use is across the entire filmmaking community. So please, we'll have a Q&A session. We are proud to, compare it to other models. Feel free to speak very freely across all this, across all this time. Please help me welcome Jon Kasbe as well, the filmmaker from this particular segment. Thank you, Jon.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to Sony as well for inviting me.
Oh, certainly. CineGear is always a connection directly to filmmakers. We always feel like we like to bring that connection directly to a group. So this is perfect. Thank you so much. With that in mind, I guess one of the things often people are just wondering, documentary, narrative, what field do I go into in filmmaking? What aspect do I want? What's some of your history, how you ended up in filmmaking in general?
Yeah. So to give a little background, I spent probably the last 7 years working on short documentaries, and it really started out as an excuse to get into situations that I wouldn't normally be able to get into. And it started very young. I was 12 years old, and for the first time in my life, something awful happened. I didn't know what to do about it. So I went to all of my friends and all of my friends' parents and raised as much money as I could, and I bought a camera, and then I went and I made this very short, awful documentary about my grandfather. Something horrible had happened to him, and I wanted people to see what was going on. So that's kind of how it started, and then from there, I got kind of addicted to just kind of meeting new people and getting into these really strange worlds using a camera. And then later on, I think I started realizing the benefits of it and feeling the satisfaction of showing it to people and kind of spreading things that people don't normally see. And then about 4 years ago, I started this film, which is my first feature film called When Lambs Become Lions. And it originated from a place of just seeing so much content come out of not only Kenya, but all of Africa that covers conservation and rangers and this kind of divide between the poachers and the rangers. And what I was seeing a lot of was that this depiction of, rangers are these good people that are trying to save the world, and these poachers are these bad people. And I'd done, 4 other projects in Kenya before this one. So I was hearing from friends there that in reality, that's not at all what was happening. And that there's a lot of crossover between the two sides, and that lots of poachers become rangers and lots of rangers are killing poachers on sight. And so one of my friends was like, come over here and you got to meet this guy named X, who's an ivory dealer. So X is the person you just met in that scene. And so I flew to Kenya and met X, and he kind of blew my mind. He was not at all what I expected. He was super charming and not at all embarrassed about what he did, and very honest and open. And I felt really drawn to that. And I found myself, after our very first meeting, just I couldn't stop thinking about him and all the things he said. In that first meeting, he told me, lots of film crews come in here, but they always make stories and they go out and they tell them, we don't really hear from them again. But the thing, if there's one, and at the time, this was the beginning of the project, and I don't think he really realized how deep of friends we were going to become or how long I was actually going to stick around. In the beginning, he said, just the one thing I want you to know is that we kill elephants, sure, but we're not killing people. I would never kill a person. And that's the line for me. And that kind of stuck with me for a long time. Anyway, but here we are. It's been 4 years. We spent about 3.5 years shooting this and editing. And now it's finished and it's out in the world.
So as you speak about building a relationship with an individual, there's obviously trust that needs to be built. But you're bringing a piece of electronics in front of them, something to document their every moment. So what was the experience in order to build that trust other than just time? What was that like?
So, for starters, I was on the phone with X for about a year before even meeting him. So once I actually met him in person, he knew everything about me that I had shared with him. I knew everything about him. We already had shared experiences. So going in, we had a bond, and he knew this was something different. And then at that point, like once I was actually there, I waited months before bringing out the camera. It was a lot of just like, and it was a lot of just me being there and getting comfortable with the characters, them getting comfortable with me, but also the larger community. I think if you're going to spend a lot of time embedding somewhere, you need not just the permission of your characters in the film, but also the community as a whole. It goes a really, really long way. And another key part of that process before the cameras even came out was being very clear about motivations, and not just mine, but also theirs. In this film, we're following people doing a lot of illegal things, and so it was really important to me that they didn't think they were going to get paid. And that money wasn't a motivating factor for them. So early on, I was very clear that you're not going to get paid from this experience. You should do this because you have a reason that you want to share your story and you want people to see what your life is like. And in the same tone, I was very clear with them. I'm here because I want to see what your life is like, and I feel like you're misrepresented, and I feel like no one has any clue what's actually happening on the ground, at the ground level with the locals. And they responded to that, and so yeah, it was probably like 4 or 5 months before even starting to shoot. And so then once the cameras did come out, they were just so used to me being in their lives, so used to me being around, that it wasn't the kind of thing where it's like, here's this new guy, let's talk to him. Here's this new guy, let's show him everything. They'd already shown me everything. I'd already been on hunts with them. I'd already seen what their life was like, and I had a strong sense of that. And so by the time the camera came out, not as much was new. It was much more familiar, and that went a really long way, because in this film, we didn't want this film to feel like a documentary. I'm actually not a big documentary fan. I generally find them like a little bit boring and just distant. Whereas narrative films always pull me in, and I'm like, I just love narrative films so much. And I remember for this early on, we were using references like The Departed and Heat, and looking at those structures when trying to design this, and thinking like, how can we create a documentary that's real and raw and authentic, but present it to audiences in a way that just plays like a narrative film. It's so weird talking to people that haven't seen it. I feel like you have to like see it for me to talk about it, but
Yes. So I did watch this film in an earlier version and then watched it at Tribeca. And one of the things I walked away with was that it did not feel like a traditional documentary. It felt like a narrative. And I think that was an intent. And that's also where you received your award for editing, right? Yeah. So it did work. It is hard to explain without seeing the entire film. But the clip that we did see so far, we have followed doc style in a certain way. We have nighttime shots. We have what looks to be single camera acquisition. Yeah. What were some of those challenges like, and how long is that day? How did you prepare for actually leaving the village or wherever you were, don't know when you're coming back?
Totally. So with this being, with access being such an important part of this film, most of the shooting was done with one camera, and that was me, because I'd built the relationship with the guy, so I actually had to shoot this myself. And we shot on the Sony FS5. And I remember going in, it was a big question as to what camera we use, because we wanted it to be, powerful enough to create a beautiful image, but also small enough and discreet enough that it wasn't going to create a big scene. I'm already an outsider coming into a place where just my skin color alone separates me. And, I'm doing everything I can to blend in as much as possible, which usually just means spending time eating the same food, travel, when people would walk, I would walk with them. When we'd go out with the Rangers for patrols, we'd be doing everything kind of the same way. And so part of that was having the smallest kit I could with no, additional plug-ons and no fancy gimbals. And so it was very, very stripped down. And the other thing about, everything being real, I never knew when things were going to stop. It's generally I would start shooting when they woke up in the morning, and I'd stop when they fell asleep at night. And that was kind of the structure. Because when it's a documentary, it's really, really hard to design the story and to see it happening when you're not interfering with it in the field. And knowing that we wanted to have this kind of narrative feel, our plan was to really film everything. And then in the edit, see how we can find ways to kind of craft the story. And that's what we did. So we came back with 700 hours of footage, and the film is 76 minutes. So you can do that math. It's scary.
I heard a gasp somewhere out there. It is
Yeah.
it is astonishing rate.
Yeah.
Now you also were shooting since you said FS5. That means we were going to SD cards.
Yes.
So
yeah.
media, in theory, would not be necessarily a challenge on cost-wise. You could keep a lot of media with you, but battery power still, for most field applications, you have to have a limit. You might be in a cold environment where the batteries would lose some draw. How did you manage your battery power?
Yeah, so it wasn't cold here, so that wasn't an issue. It was very, very hot. The battery was the thing, and I mean, I think I had two U90s, which are like the big Sony ones, and then two U60s, and then a U30. And that, I mean, it was pretty rare that I actually run out of batteries. And the times when I was most worried about it was on the hunts, because when I would go on a hunt I haven't told them what the film's about.
Yeah, we could actually do clip two too. That would
Should
open up.
well, let me.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you. So this is, they know what I'm talking about. This is a film about an ivory dealer who works with elephant poachers and a wildlife ranger, and they're cousins. These two men are cousins. So yeah, let's play the second clip. So that is Asan. He's the wildlife ranger that we followed throughout this. Who is X's cousin. It's funny because it wasn't until about a year in that I realized they were cousins. And I met him also a lot later. I met X much sooner than I met Asan. So I met Asan, and then I think it was like 2 months after I met him, it came out they were cousins. And that was kind of the moment for me when I was like, okay, this thing that I thought was going to be a short film could be something much bigger. And we should stick with it and see if it becomes that.
So in the process of filmmaking, you're there over sporadic time, or how do you end up dedicating? Because these are moments. It seems like we're seeing certain things over time. How do you manage returning back? Is that one of the things that you were constantly returning? Yeah,
I mean, it's always it's such a tricky thing when you're doing a doc, and like that if you're not in the field, like nothing good happens, right? Because whatever happens, you miss, and so you're not moving things forward. So it's a really tricky thing coming back. But I would usually go for periods of time for about 4 or 5 months and stay, and then I would come back and offload all the footage, and talk with editors and start trying to sculpt the story as much as I could in my mind to inform the next shoot. And then it eventually got to a point where we just had so much material that it was like, okay, we need to stop. I remember my producers coming to me and being like, John, you need to stop shooting. This is we need to, if you don't stop, we're never going to be able to finish editing this because we just won't be able to look at it all. And so there came a point where they kind of they drew a line. They were like, no more.
So but you do have a number of shots that seem that it was intentional framing. Being single camera, you really were always editing in your mind, it looks like already. Talk about on the days that you did have 2 cameras, how did you communicate with each other to know what positions you should be in, that type of stuff? And when ultimately I see that it's not, I'm sorry, why don't we stop with that for a second? Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, in terms of framing, it's I have a really simple rule of thumb that I always kind of go back to is when I'm looking in the viewfinder and looking at the image and think does this, am I enjoying looking at this? Because if I'm not, there's a reason why, and I should try to figure out what that is. And usually if there's not, and there's not an actual moment happening, I'll try to think about that, figure out what it is, and change, and either take my angle a little bit lower and look up, or come at it from the side and let the light hit the person from behind, and really just trying to it's really about figuring out the core of what's happening in the scene and in the moment that you're in, and figuring out how to not necessarily most beautifully represent that, but most honestly represent that. And sometimes it's beautiful, but oftentimes it's not. But I think recognizing that and thinking outside of for me, especially with the gear, my goal is to the specs and the frame rate and the ISO and all. I don't want to ever be thinking about that. I want that set and I want it to be good, and then I want to be able to connect with the person and figure out what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what's happening, and then figure out how to best represent that. Because at the end of the day, this film was designed to be a representation of my experience in the field and what I found while I was there. Yeah, does that kind of...
Absolutely. And on the days with the second camera, he followed the same premise. You just kind of treat it as DP and camera operator, just sharing, this is my intent. And
so there were some situations where, I mean, over the course of the film, we actually had, in the final film, there were three main characters. But as we were shooting, we actually had four. There was a fourth character that we cut out in the edit. And so what would happen a lot is that multiple things were happening with different characters in different places. So there came a point where I pulled in another cinematographer, two of them actually, that came at different times, to kind of film both sides of these things and to get two sides of phone calls, and to get, two sides of meetings. And, there'd be a lot of times where I'd be out on hunts with the poachers and things would be happening with the ranger unit. I really wanted to see their response to it as it was happening. Because we knew, from this onset that we wanted this to feel like a narrative. We wanted this to feel like a verite film. We didn't want to be telling people what was happening. We wanted people to see it and to feel it. And so part of that was kind of communicating how I wanted it shot, and it more than how to frame people or how to light things, because both the two other cinematographers were David Bullen and Alex Pritz, who are really talented, great shooters. But my main core nugget for them was actually something that an editor told me a few years ago. Her name was Anat Seedy. She's a brilliant editor. She cut Jesus Camp. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but she's I think one of the smartest editors out there right now. I was doing a different project that she was cutting, and it was in Haiti, and we went and we shot, and we brought the footage back, and she was cutting it, and we had the luxury of going back to shoot more. And she pulled me into the edit room, and she said, "Jon, you're not the editor." She said, "I'm the editor, but you're editing while you're shooting, and you can't do that because it's not up to you to decide when the edit's made." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" She's really intense, by the way. She's she's really smart and really, really intense. And then she explained to me more, and she was like, you're framing up your shot, and you're getting it, and then you're rushing to the next angle or to the next shot, and you're getting all this great coverage, but you're telling me when to cut, and you're not letting me choose because the in-betweens of your shots it's a mess. And she's like, "You can't shoot that way because it's not your role to figure that out. That's my role. And so when you go back to Haiti, I want you to shoot every day like it's one shot. So you turn the camera on, you hit record, and you're in one shot until you're done. And there are no transitions because those transitions are things that I might want to use, and it's not up for you to pick." So that was kind of what I was trying to explain to my second shooters is to do the same thing. It was like a mixture of it's not your job to edit while you're shooting, and it's so many shooters are also editing their own work, and directing and producing and doing it all themselves. So that's become a really popular thing, and that's kind of how I was brought up as well. But when you divide and conquer, and you have people that specialize in things, I think it changes a little bit. So that was kind of the core thing that I was trying to explain to both my other shooters, to not cut and to let the editor decide when they wanted to cut, and it wasn't their role to figure that out. That paired with just don't shoot the same thing I'm shooting. When we're in the same place and we're both shooting something, it's really, I don't know why, it's just a thing that happens. And now, I struggled with that one when there's two very similar angles of the same event.
So something else that occurs to me is the content obviously is not our native language. Did you understand the language? Were you getting a translator? How did that impact you actually? I don't assume that's your native language, right?
Yeah. So the native language here is Kiswahili, but then there's also a ton of local dialects that are based on the tribe people are from. So there's Borana, Somali, Turkana, and at the beginning, when I went out, I started taking Kiswahili lessons, and I was getting kind of decent at it. I was being able to understand what was being said. I wasn't very great at speaking it, but I was being able to understand what was being said. And I realized really quickly the characters, X and Lucas, the two poachers, hated it. They were like, when you can understand what's being said, and we're doing these deals, and people realize you're figuring it out, it freaks them out, and they want you to leave. So they were like, you need to act dumb, act like you don't understand anything, and that's the best route to get you in these rooms and to get these moments filmed. And so I very quickly kind of took the opposite approach, and it ended up working a lot better. But then, on the flip side too, there were also a lot of situations where it's really hard to understand what's going on when you don't actually speak the language and you don't know what they're saying. You can pick up a lot from facial expressions and emotion. But when it's context, it's tricky. And so there were other times where I'd bring a fixer in the field, and I would have, so I laved up all the characters every day that we shot. And I would have a fixer with me that would have the lav feed going into a lav receiver that he would have headphones on, that he could hear. And then I'd put a lav mic on him, and then he would translate it into me, so that I could actually understand what was happening in real time. And that was super helpful with the local dialects that there was just no way I was ever going to be able to learn.
So you found your takes ended up becoming longer by not necessarily being as immersed in their discussion.
Yeah, that's the other
as
thing.
Original thing.
Yes,
Sounds like.
yeah, I should mention that as well. So I would say probably like 40% of the time I had a fixer that was translating things to me, but the 60% of the time where I didn't, I found myself working way, way harder, because you never know when you've got it or when the scene's over or what you know. It's so easy when you're shooting a scene to have the person say it's a scene about apples and the person says apples and you're like, oh, we got it, okay, cool, we're done here. But when you don't know what apples is, you just keep going. And it was a beautiful thing, because then we found out in the edit there were so many scenes that I thought were about X but ended up editorially becoming about Y. And I don't think we would have necessarily had that flexibility or that much content if I'd known what was being said throughout.
Fantastic. So this size room, it's really an intimate setting here. We've been able to watch some content, speak about the creatives behind things. If there are any questions that you're starting to feel that, based on what we've already discussed, are there any questions in the room right now at this point? I know we haven't crossed the technical aspect of it. Any questions? Excellent. Back in the middle.
Yeah, I was just wondering, he was gone for so long, and you were gone for so long. How did you, did you have money saved up? I mean, how did you get this film done?
Yeah, good questions. So the question is about financing. How did you fund this? So at the beginning, I used Kickstarter. And I raised about like $38,000 on Kickstarter just to get out there and to create a proof of concept. So I went out, shot a bunch of stuff, came back, created like a 2.5-minute trailer, put together a deck, just tried to, as much as I could, like visually create something that could show people the idea. And at the beginning it was really simple. It was like, let's understand how poachers live and why they're killing elephants. I feel like it's a space that hasn't been tapped into and that no one's really talking about. And there seems to be a lot of confusion around it and a lot of information there. And then I had pitched it to a company called the Documentary Group, which is a production company in New York. The last film they did was called Cartel Land. Yeah, it's a great film. It's a great film. And they felt like this could kind of align with that in some ways. So they ended up coming on as a co-production company. And then together we pitched it to a company called Fusion, which is a subset of Univision. And they came on as our main financial backers and really made it all possible.
Good question. There was a question over here.
Yeah, my question, because of the language difference, was there a editor's choice in how that was translated?
Yeah, I'm actually, the great question. This is maybe one of the parts I'm most proud of in this film. So when I was in the field, I had a team of 15 local people, local Kenyans that were what we called subtitlers. So every day at the end of the day, I'd come back with all the footage and we would pull it into a Premiere timeline, the whole daily, and then we would export an MP3 of the day. And then an MP3 would be sent to these 15 subtitlers, and they'd split it up between them. And then they used this program called Annotation Edit, which allowed them to listen to the MP3 and type what they were hearing. And as they typed it, it saved the data with timecode. And then from Annotation Edit, I could export an XML and a bunch of, I remember if they're PNGs or TIFFs, but it exports images of each subtitle. And then I could pull that XML into Premiere and it would connect it to all of those subtitles that were created as images. And so once after each shoot, I would come back to the States and I would have everything I'd shot in a Premiere timeline with subtitles on it so that an English-speaking editor could come in and understand every single second. Which was huge. It saved us so much time in post. I remember we started last January editing, and the editor spent the first 2 months just watching everything, and it was amazing. He could just understand everything. It was awesome.
700 hours later.
700 hours later, yeah.
So that covers a lot of the finance, the creative, the background. What were some of the pieces of gear that you brought with you? What were the key pieces that made the film capable of being lightweight or this and that? What helped?
So obviously the body of the camera we're using is the Sony FS5. And then I was mostly using Canon lenses, the 35 millimeter prime and the 50 millimeter prime. And then in situations where I was either going to a place for the first time or had no idea what was going to happen, and I felt like there'd be a lot of movement, I would use the Canon 24-105. And then I'd use the Metabone Speed Booster as the adapter between the lenses and the camera. And then in terms of stabilization, there was like a neck strap I would use, and I would just put it around my neck. And I'm kind of tall, I'm like 6'4", and so the neck strap would go around here, and I could just hold the camera here, and it gave me the ability to kind of do anything. Getting in and out of cars, getting in and out of places, running. It was very, very flexible and free, and not as intimidating. It was like very easy for me to like be shooting, but then also to like be putting the camera down and just connecting, or to be connecting and then bringing the camera up and shooting. And also a lot of times like connecting and shooting without even looking at the camera or the like person really feeling or being aware. Like my goal with this was to like, as much as possible, I think it's impossible to do it fully, but my goal was to create a situation where they were forgetting about me and forgetting about the camera as much as possible, which I think is a mixture of just time and commitment and patience, but also having gear that is small enough and simple enough that you're not thinking about it.
I was with Kirsten Johnson on a panel, and she brought the FS5 with her onto the panel like this. She held it the entire time on her body. It just stayed there the entire time. And a question came up from the audience, and she approached them two different ways. Once came up, held it the whole time walking towards the subject, and the subject actually kind of leaned back and moved away. And the second time she sat next to him, and about somewhere in the middle of the conversation, raised the camera up. Two totally different reactions. So I've seen it firsthand from a filmmaker, and
she made Camera Person. I don't know if anyone's seen this amazing film. Camera Person is her.
Yeah. I hope a friend in common. Sorry to mention other filmmakers. I think
She's
that's
awesome.
friendly to
She's awesome, yeah.
So I imagine a bunch of people in the room are thinking the same. How did you monitor this kind of shooting? Some of these scenes right here. Can you truly know what you had in a viewfinder, in a panel? What were you using to monitor? That's difficult.
So throughout the whole, we used the monitor that comes with the FS5, I don't know what it's called, the LCD
built-in
small,
monitor.
the built-in monitor. Yeah, I mean, I've been on shoots where you put bigger monitors on, and it's great because you can see if your focus is perfect. You can see if the color and the LUT and all of that is accurate. This just wasn't that kind of project. And I think more than anything, it was like kind of embracing the messiness of it and allowing things to be out of focus at times and allowing things to be a little bit off. So in this situation, like setting focus here was less about looking at the monitor and more thinking about, is the character 4 feet or 5 feet in front of me, and kind of letting that be what was dictating the focus. And I think that was it was either a 50 or a 35 fix. So we were at like 1.2, 1.4, which is, I think, part of the reason why we're seeing the stars kind of shine so brightly there.
So we have, we do see some source of lights in those shots there, other than just the natural ambient light. But did you bring much lighting with you? In this case, I'm referring to the cell phone light, just kind of illuminated the face. But how intentional was lighting, and was it sparse?
Yeah, there was none. We didn't bring any extra lights, but we were very intentional about how we used the light that was there. So like when we like in the first clip you saw where we interviewed X, like we really thought about where light was coming into that room and how we were kind of positioning him within it. And we thought about that a lot. And then we don't have a scene that you're going to see today with it, but with Asan's interview, the wildlife ranger, almost all of his interviews happen at night while he's in bed at his ranger unit, which is just, he's sleeping in like a hole in the dirt. And for that, we used actually his cell phone. Like he has a little flashlight on his cell phone that he's always using at night because they don't have they're extremely under-resourced, and they're not getting paid well, and their payments late, and that's a big theme and plot point throughout the film. And so whenever, the sun goes down, they're all just using these little flashlights on their cell phone. So we actually used that flashlight from his cell phone to light his interview. And let him lay down like he would when he goes to sleep, and then just put a little bit behind his head and tilted it up a little bit so that it's both hitting the lens, but also giving you just enough of his face to be able to understand who he is and to see and feel the emotion of of what he's going through. So yeah, there was none. There was nothing.
Got it. So we did hear it shot in S-Log. It sounds like you shot log.
S-Log 3, yeah.
Okay.
But we actually, so we shot everything in daytime in S-Log 3, and then we shot the night stuff in Cine 4. Thanks to you, Al. Did you guys know who this is? He's put something on the internet that was very influential in our process, which explained to people who aren't geniuses like myself that S-Log 3 is not the right picture profile to use at night. So actually for the first year of shooting, I was shooting everything in S-Log 3 at night, and we struggled with it, and then we switched to shooting it in Cine 4, which was great.
And pencils just went to paper right now. Everybody just wrote that one down. Other questions about the acquisition right in the middle?
Your audio was pretty good there. You walk around with lavs on them, or?
Yeah, it's really funny. After the first year of shooting, I would just leave the lavs with them. They would sleep with them. The first thing I'd do in the morning is wake up, put them on. I mean, I was also living with these guys, you know. So it was like it was me, the 3 lavs I brought, the Zoom H6, and then the Sony, and that was kind of it. And then I had 3 outfits. So it was like very simple, like trying to bring as little as possible, and really getting into just a flow. It was really just like designing a pattern that allowed us to be able to capture as much of their lives as possible, which was having as little gear as possible and making sure they were always lobbed up.
With the hat in the back? Yes.
So how often did you position them in a way so that you liked the lighting setup?
The only time I would do that were in formal interviews. So the first scene we saw where we meet X and he's lighting the cigarette and then you see his face, those are the only times we're telling anyone to really do anything in terms of like sit this way. And even then it was just like, he showed us 8 rooms that we could do it in that were quiet, and we just picked the one we liked. We, opened the window to the distance we wanted it at, and then we positioned the chair where we wanted, and then we let him sit down. Even within that though, like he found all types of ways to screw it up, and we kind of tried to embrace them. He would, answer his phone throughout the interview. He would like move the chair. He would start drinking. He would start smoking. I mean, the smoking we ended up kind of loving. It gave a great feel, and they smoke so much. So it didn't feel right to really tell them not to do that or anything, but very little. I mean, this wasn't, like I didn't come into this film wanting to say something. This wasn't about me trying to send a message to the world or to audiences. It was really about finding a way to be a vessel for them to share their story. And it's, to be honest, like it's tempting, it's so tempting when you're in the field and when you know what you think is beautiful and you know what you think is cool and you know what you think is good, to try to take other people's experiences and other people's lives and other visuals and kind of craft them through that. But we wanted to do as much as we could to pull away from that and to strip it and not make it about us or even the filmmaking process, but really make it about their story and what was happening. It's really, really hard. So I edited on this film as well, and it's a really, really hard process. And I had 2 other editors that worked with me who were amazing. But it was really tricky because there were just so many scenes that I felt like were so much more beautiful and so much more what ultimately ended up being about me or the cinematography or the access rather than the story. And so I think as much as you can remember that and surround yourself with people that will remind you that and make it not about egos but about the core of what you're trying to do, it goes a long way.
Hi,
Yes.
I know you mentioned that you didn't really want this to feel like a documentary, and then from what I've seen so far, it seems like the sound design kind of makes that separation. How much of an emphasis did you put on the sound design? Is that important for you?
Yeah, the sound design was really important. We had a guy named Paul Shue do the sound design who's really, really good, and he mostly does narratives. And he doesn't take on many docs. So the one he just finished was Ocean's 8. So he was like doing Ocean's 8 and then like working on this on weekends when he had time. But no, the sound design was really important. But it's interesting because, the first pass on the sound design, I said, Paul, do what you want. Just like, you're a pro, do your thing. And then we ended up, and he did a lot of amazing stuff. We ended up going back to the scratch track a lot and being like, well, what actually happened? Like, what did it actually sound like here? And actually stripping a lot of things away, and going back to that in a lot of cases, and leaving things kind of messy, like leaving the wind sounds in and leaving some of the audio interference that gave it that kind of raw texture. Yeah. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah.
There was a question earlier in the middle. Is that still? Yes.
Yeah, it's actually the same question.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
Really rich. It's making money on a lot from watching this.
It's a rich place. It's a rich place is what, I mean, Paul's amazing, but I think it comes from a very rich, textured place.
Something to the right there.
I'm just curious with the amount of time you spent, you said without the camera, and then the amount of hours you captured. How was your storytelling process in your mind? I mean, were you prepping for everything, or was it just entertained?
Good question. For me, it was a little bit more as it came. I didn't want to overthink it in a way. I find that like when I prepare and I really think about it too much, and you get into a place where you try to control it. And I didn't want to be controlling this. I wanted to be just hanging on for dear life and following. So the other thing, I don't know if anyone who's worked in Kenya, but it's very difficult to like plan there. The sense of time, the sense of the past and the future is completely different. It doesn't matter what you did yesterday. It doesn't matter what you're going to say you're going to do tomorrow. All that matters is right here and right now and today. Yeah, so I mean, I think at the beginning I was probably doing more of that. Like going in, I was probably doing more preparing, thinking about what are we going to shoot today? How does this fall into the story? But very quickly realized that it was a really quick way to not really get anywhere, but also to frustrate the people you're working with. It's such a weird thing. It's such a weird thing to get a camera and to make a documentary about someone and to follow them around doing like their real life and to act like you're not there. It's just a bizarre thing to do. And so I think as much as you can, kind of putting the relationship with the character before the film and respecting them, it goes a really, really long way. Like with this one, there were a number of times, these guys are on the brink of poverty, and I'm coming in as an outsider with a camera. So just naturally, there's tension there. I can't tell you the number of times they wanted me to give them money or wanted me to pay them for the access they were giving me. And they quit. They quit the project a number of times because of that. And at the end of the day, it was not just like saying it, but like showing it with my actions that like the relationship that I had built with them was the top priority, and that came before the film, ahead of the film. And part of that also meant like there were a number of things that I wanted to shoot that were happening that they would say, don't shoot this, and I would always not shoot it. Things that would make the film better, things that would make the film more commercial, things that would make the film more exciting, things that like in my mind I thought the film needed to work. And there were a number of times where I'd film things that afterwards they would say, hey, we're nervous about what you just shot, we want to delete it, and we'd delete the footage. But at the end of the day, like that's I think what this project needed and took to kind of keep the relationship healthy and to keep going, because the goal was really to keep going. And putting the relationship ahead of everything else. So
since we're speaking about sort of a retrospective view of it, is there anything in the technical that you would actually change if you were going back out and, with the experience you have now, would you have preferred multiple cameras? Would you have hired a sound man, not hired a sound man? Anything along those lines that, looking back at, you would actually change? Yeah. In terms of technically in the field, no. I mean, I think the things I would do is I'd probably try to stay there longer. I think it never hurts to stay longer. So I think I would have spent more time in the field. And then I think I also would have brought in an editor sooner. The editors are like the smartest people in this process. They're like the true geniuses. And just having an editor that you can talk about what you're going through, that you can see what you're seeing, and allowing them to kind of just take that information and funnel it through their story mind goes such a long way. I brought on an editor in the last year of the project, but I would have loved to have brought in an editor sooner that I could have just been talking to throughout, because it's tough to be like experiencing all this stuff and recording all this footage, but not to have a support system or someone that's just like not as connected or emotionally attached to it. We've been very flattering to many positions within the production crew. I'm curious here, do we have cross-section DPs raising their hands? Really, that's only about 10 hands. And editors or producer side? Okay.
Oh.
Okay, so it's a mixed bag. I was curious of that in the sense that how much relates to which group. Yeah. I'm sorry, you were starting to ask something?
Yeah, thank you. Did
Yes.
the editors go there for a visit to get your view through the lens, or was it mostly through your view or through the video?
Yeah, no. So the editors didn't come, and it was really important to me that they didn't. I didn't want them there. And then in terms of like through my view, I also I did as little. I didn't really want them to know what it took to get these shots. Like, I believe that the footage should speak to them, and that that's what they should be using to read where the emotion's at, what's important, what someone's feeling, not what it took for me to get it or what I thought it was in the field. Because in reality, like, you know, I can film this person here and can say that he's feeling all these things, but in reality, if the footage doesn't speak it to someone that wasn't there, it doesn't mean that. And so yeah, I mean, I remember a number of times like sitting in the edit being like, wait, no, guys, this is really important. Like, this matters. There's so much going on here, but it wasn't reading through the footage. And I thought that because of what happened before and what happened after and what had happened surrounding it that month. So yeah, I think it's really important to keep it separate.
I'm sure we're curious, where can we see your film next?
Yeah, good question. So next we're taking it, so we premiered it at Tribeca Film Festival in New York, and then we just screened it at Mountain Film and Telluride. And next we're taking it to Sheffield in England. So if anyone's going to be in England in like a week, let me know.
Well, I'm sure the future involves some mass distribution at some point.
Hopefully. And
Yes.
yeah, we haven't done an LA screening yet, but if you want to see it in LA, we have a Facebook page called the title of the film, When Lambs Become Lions. If you search it, we'll put something up there when we're going to screen it in LA.
I don't know how many could relate to going to a tusk burn, but any questions from that footage that you just seen just now over in the back right?
It's more of a general question. Have you shown the film, screened the film for the principals, and what has their reaction?
Yes, I have.
So what do the characters think of the films
It's a great
now
question.
that they've seen it?
Yeah. So I from the beginning, I mean, from the very beginning when I met X, there was a nervousness in me about the whole project and any legal repercussions for the characters and what it could mean for them. And I don't think it was really until I showed it to them, I showed it to them a few times, but the last time was in November. And it's kind of hard to answer that question without having seen the film, but they had very different reactions. But ultimately, both X and Asan were very in support of it. Oh gosh, yeah, I have to be so careful what I say because I'm going to ruin something. But yes, I did show it to them. They liked the film. X is a huge fan of it. I think he feels like a rock star. Asan also loves it. I think it's really important to show to people. But there was a little bit of a nervousness from him that is, when you see the film, is explained. But at this point, you know, we've hired lawyers in the States and in Kenya that are consulting with them regularly. We've changed all of their names. We've hidden the locations of everything that's happening. We've been in touch with the officials that run the companies that the Wildlife Ranger unit is a part of. And so right now we're feeling good about all of that.
There's a responsibility taken.
Yeah.
There was a question up front, right here. Yes.
What did it take to get access to the tusk burning?
Yeah, so it's funny so this was the ivory burn that happened in 2016, and Kenya designed it to be this kind of media event where they wanted to show the world what was happening, but they also made it extremely hard to get into. If you weren't with ABC, NBC, CNN, one of these big news networks, they weren't letting you in, and I wasn't with any of those. So I remember emailing everyone I could get a hold of, calling, showing up, and they were like, no, sorry, we can't let you in, we can't let you in, we can't let you in. So the day of, I showed up at 5 a.m., and when I was this is kind of a funny story, when I was in college, there was a video competition where the winner, called the White House News Association video competition, and the winner of it gets to go meet Obama, because he was president at the time. So I won it, I met Obama, I got this photo with me and Obama. And so I go to the Ivory Burn the morning of. I get there at 5 a.m. I'm the first one in line. I'm like waiting. They open up the doors at 7, and I just looked at the guy and I'm like, I'm here shooting for Obama. And I showed him this picture, and he just looked at me, and his eyes got really big, and then he just said, go. And that was it. So the core of the lesson is there's always a way. So don't take no for an answer.
I don't think many of us could say the phrase "me and Obama." That's just not an opportunity that you often get to say. That's great. There was a question right up here. Right up here.
Yeah, you said that you're just letting it unfold naturally. How long did it take in your process to realize the story that you were making, and did you have to go back to do like pickups or something to try to flush that out? Or
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like the whole 3.5 years of making it were part of that. There was never a moment. I mean, even now the film is done and there's still things happening in the field that I'm like, I should be shooting this. So I don't know that it ever ends. I don't know that you ever, at least for me, there was never a moment where I was like, I figured it out. And honestly, the more I learned about the situation, the more time I spent there, it was really like I'd figure out this much, but realized that there was this much that I didn't know. And it wasn't until I learned that. It's like the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't actually know. And that was really the process for me. But I mean, there's milestones. Like you hit your first rough cut and you realize like there's something. You have a 2.5 hour film that's something. And then you start, making it tighter, making it smaller, making it a little bit more interesting. And in terms of, I didn't go back and shoot pickups, but when you see the film, you realize that the last scene of the film actually is like a plot point that happens that unfolded 2 weeks before our Tribeca premiere. So 2 weeks before we'd locked the film in December, and then 2 weeks beforehand, I get a call from one of the characters saying something very important and huge. And so I flew back there and filmed it, and then came back and we rushed to like refinish it for Tribeca.
Well, hearing again about Tribeca, let's all congratulate Jon on his film and thank you for his time here. I'd also like to invite you all to our booth setup where we have multiple cameras for your review, and there are filmmakers also in our booth that actually gave a presentation before. So let's please keep this conversation going. We'd love to speak with filmmakers. And again, thank you for all your time.
Yeah,
and
thank you all for coming out on such a beautiful day.
Thank you all.